This video is sponsored by KnucklesOX, Baba Snake, Julio the Boy, Blazing Darkness G, and Danny Mash X. If you'd like to directly support my content, as well as catch it early, have your name credited as a sponsor, or maybe even have your What If Ideas produce its commissions, consider visiting the links to my Patreon and such in the description below. Our story resumes as Krillin is confronted and winds up meeting a messenger from the future who warns of an incoming threat 18 years out. As for this story specifically, more than most Dragon Ball What Ifs, a warning from a time traveler is a bit more of an aggressive Deus Ex Machina than even the canon story saw, mostly on account of the fact that our heroes are already using the secret weapon that would normally be first used to great effect in the upcoming saga. Thus, the time traveler also mentions an arguably smaller threat is only 3 years away, being from their perspective as an offshoot of this early time chamber timeline, a version of the androids and Cell saga that would have played out fairly differently, but much more favorably than it would have for the future from canon, just without the need for a messenger from the future, and still likely seeing a Cell from an alternate timeline with no androids, traveling back to attain perfection. As overall, while it is true the android saga is usually where you can slow down and equal things out if you're cast for a what if it's too overpowered, and because the Cell from this story would still have sources of powerful DNA like Piccolo Jr.'s, and possibly even a bit more / stronger Saiyan DNA than we have in canon on account of our redeemed Raditz Nappa in this story, as well as Ginyu Force DNA, though admittedly aside from Godo's time stop, that wouldn't be exceedingly dangerous, and even then Cell wouldn't for example be getting access to techniques from Yardrat, as Nappa actually did have to remain on a dying planet to defeat Frieza, and the Ginyu Force's ships wouldn't have been available to him. Not to mention Nappa would have also likely known how to fly them and any other ship if they were, so he would have just set his coordinates for Earth specifically. In the end, however, it should be mentioned, this would still result in a potential teacher for instant transmission, as the anime version of King Kai states that he knows and would be able to teach it as well. So I would just argue in the context of this story, the mastery of the technique would come after the Cell saga is dealt with, leaving Cell no real way to blow up and come back, while just to address it, going for a body swap would be unlikely and dumb, while trying to time stop multiple or stronger fighters wouldn't end well. Thus, the future Cell would have likely just been destroyed, possibly before absorbing any androids. And if we go with the idea that the heart virus either originated from or was only going to affect the Z fighter or fighters who traveled to Yardrat after Namek, then we would also likely end up inadvertently avoiding it as a plot point as well. It's not even necessarily a matter of strength, as it's possible this Cell's raw power could be even greater than his canon counterpart. It's more that his overall arsenal and the threat he poses just gets diminished compared to canon, especially when the characters have been and are certainly going to be even more willing to spam Hyperbolic Time Chamber training when there is a problem or upcoming threat, as consider just the simple fact that in the canon Cell saga, by the time they had their own opportunities to take turns, fighters like Krillin, Yamcha, Tien, and Chaozu were already so daunted and demoralized that they didn't even attempt to enter the Room of Spirit and Time. So it therefore would be pretty worthwhile here that now everyone would be open and eager for it, because kinda by definition, we're now getting closer to how Dragon Ball Super treats time chamber training and further away from the original premise of the what if, since all subsequent time chamber use won't exactly be early. It's also worth mentioning that one of the original ways I thought to take this scenario was to possibly see Dr. Gero sneaking into and using the time chamber himself, since that could act as an easy enough and interesting equalizer, based on how it's played out at least. But over time, I've actually changed my opinion on that, and now I actually think that to be worth a full what if all its own. Which, to be fair, this what if already has a few other concepts like that all trying to share the spotlight, which also would likely do better on their own, as sometimes they create situations like this, where the initial story premise can't handle everything at once and maintain itself at the same time. By that I mean, I just don't think the Android saga specifically could be all that hard in this timeline, unless we purposely make it hard. And that to me feels like a good sign of us having reached a natural conclusion point for at least this version of this what if. Thus, as they regale Krillin with all this information in a way he can understand, narrative-wise, the time traveler would stress that they needed to be careful disclosing any of this to Krillin, as they state in their own words that if this goes well, it would change everything and bring hope, but if it went wrong, Krillin would fumble his entire bag and definitely make a worse timeline than the one they come from. This is originally presented as a joke, which Krillin laughs off, but the messenger declares it is literally a warning sent from their own thoughts and regrets, not yet had. And they know this because they are the future version of Krillin himself, having arrived at this place after going on a grand tour through time. Future Krillin conveys that he comes from a world where the Z fighters have already fought and won many fated and fierce battles, until eventually, creatures known as the Shadow Dragons born from negative energy built up after constant use of the Dragon Balls presented the ultimate final crisis for the heroes, where in the end, having worked hard to continuously surpass his limits, Goku stood at the peak alone and wielded the ultimate power of universal harmony through a spirit bomb, and then, after achieving a state of enlightenment, he left the living and otherworld for a brand new adventure, going somewhere even further beyond, and completely out of the reach of his friends, family, and his formerly worthy rivals. However, for this future reality, where the events of Dragon Ball GT have played out, the bittersweet goodbye had left behind a burning passion to somehow catch up to Goku just one last time. And because of this, they have worked with Bulma, and even gained the help of a mysterious ring supplied by Kibito Kai, in order to attempt to alter this outcome in a worthy timeline, where it was also at risk of happening eventually. Hearing all this, and recognizing he's heard stranger things, and more importantly, wanting to still compete with his best friend, as he has already been doing so much more successfully over the course of our story, Krillin lends an ear to his future mustachioed self. Future Krillin's warning, however, is essentially just what every major fan of the Earthling, or lesser focused on Z fighters, argues for whenever we want to see them get stronger, and that's mostly just by having them use everything at their disposal. Though here, the advice is coming from a more senior version of Krillin, who states even future Tien, Yamcha, and Chiaotzu felt the same way, that they should all change their approach to keeping up with the future threats. A proposed idea of how to accomplish this, however, is for the present Krillin to get the androids of their timeline on the side of the Z fighters early. As from what he speculates, if they were able to make use of their capabilities in preparation for opponents like Majin Buu and beyond, starting sooner rather than later, everyone would have been a lot better prepared for what was to come, as in their time, fighters like future Yamcha and Krillin would originally spend a great portion of the period after dealing with Cell in a state of basic retirement from fighting, as it generally appeared as if nothing worth training for was coming, at least not as all out and fervently as they always had, to the extent of making earlier, or even continue to use the Time Chamber. While on the other hand, even if they never stopped training, Tien and Chiaotzu did spend a lot of time training in isolation, not testing themselves against their friends and rivals, which could also be pointed to as one of the attributes that led to the downfall of the Z fighters keeping in close competition with one another, regardless of their differences in battle powers. But now in retrospect, even the most casual or lazy fighters amongst their ranks had expressed a desire to do it all over again, and use all the exploits available to them, like seeking immortality just like Master Roshi did, abusing the Dragon Balls to maintain their youthful looks like Bulma does, if vanity truly meant all that much in pursuit of power to them, and even spending a longer portion of their life grinding away at training in the Room of Spirit and Time than they did outside the Hellish Room before Goku left on the journey they couldn't follow him on, if that was what was necessary. Future Krillin wanted to give this timeline a chance to avoid the regrets and grief his own endured, challenging his other self to rise to the occasion. Then, after a short spar, in which the former Orin Temple monk is completely blown away that anyone could be so strong, let alone an old man version of himself, Z Krillin thanks GT Krillin for his insight, before the time traveler goes on his way, leaving the monk to dwell on what he has been told, before he then completes the Dragon Ball hunt in order to wish back Planet Namek, as well as everyone killed by Frieza and his men there, restoring the lives of those who fell on the mission to defeat Frieza, whom upon being wished back to life, state that they will return via Kami at the check-in station, when a year has passed, as it will allow them time to train under King Kai. After which, Krillin shares what he has been told with the others to hear their thoughts, leaving out only the specific warnings of Goku's enlightenment and ascension for the sake of not willing to guilt or impede his friend, or anyone else's natural progression. And so, because this super future warning makes the Android saga a near afterthought, as the Z fighters know a bit more of what to expect, to the extent that even slight differences like the existence of a 19 and 20 wouldn't throw them off on account of no heart virus, and the fact that they'd have been training for what's coming in 18 years rather than only 3 years. So the Z fighters begin the hunt for Cell extremely early, with the Saiyans' desire for a good fight and natural hunting skills so expertly employed for their past duties under Frieza, making them exceedingly useful here, especially when Chiaotzu and Tien Shinhan as former assassins tag along to help them. And the best part would be that they are able to begin this search and their own training simultaneously, and almost immediately. Meanwhile, a team of specifically Krillin, Goku, and Piccolo go to free the android and offer them a proposition to go ahead and allow them to complete their programming by challenging them to duels in the Hyperbolic Time Chamber. The idea being that it simultaneously satisfies the android's programming to kill Goku and the Z fighters, in the case of 16, while for 17 and 18, not being able to sense ki and likely being a great deal stronger than their canon counterparts, they will be able to get all their interest and enjoyment with fighting out of their system, as they would essentially get to exhaust themselves with playmates who can handle them at least somewhat, in an environment that can take as much of the beating as they can dish out. Thus, needless to say, if the androids were to agree to this, it would pretty easily break the power scale of this story once again, when that has already happened before with Gohan and Piccolo using the time chamber early, allowing them to essentially jump entire arcs worth of strength before that power was actually needed. This is especially true considering the potential to grow stronger for at least Cyborg 17 and 18. And as for Android 16, if and when his power is exceeded during training, it isn't impossible for him to be vastly upgraded, / to help Bulma upgrade himself, especially since the Z fighters could easily take the android schematics in a continuity where they already know where the lab is, and when they likely wouldn't have much trouble dealing with Jiro by himself. So that means training for Majin Buu could basically just begin in earnest, and be extremely intense, with the characters doing all they can to grow in anticipation for the threat they've been warned of, and seeing no retirement environments and no isolation, while the time chamber is still likely in very constant use. The Saiyans would all begin catching up to and competing with the Earthlings, and soon Nappa, likely one by one tapping into the power of Super Saiyan over the years, and in the process, vastly stacking this universe's roster of non-Earthling warriors in terms of strength, even though we're losing out on a traditional Saiyan hybrid Trunks. Besides, again, now the Z Fighters aren't just using the time chamber early since we're past that point. It's being used more so continuously / optimized, along with likely all other known of and available training methods for the Earthlings, as well as for Piccolo and the Saiyans, which in my opinion becomes one of the reasons this material falls less interesting for a narrative what if, as it can be very plain, cliche, and found extremely commonly in alternate universes across different creators, interpretations, and fan content, leading to this what if possibly becoming more stale than it needs to be, as it begins to just boil down to Dragon Ball but extra characters are unnecessarily here, and everyone is arbitrarily stronger, with me just saying that over and over and over again from multiple parts. That's why I felt the Soul Saga of this story just kinda represents one of those key points that comes in most what ifs, where you can either pack it in gracefully, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and know when to run, or you can just draw the story out even if it ends up not all that good, or exceedingly different from any other Dragon Ball what if out there, especially if they're dealing with the same factors and players available to it, making it best in my opinion that I acknowledge this time chamber power inflation problem that is kinda inherent to this what if by dealing with it head on, and I want to respect your time by not just yapping about fluff for another 2 hours plus. So in order to avoid this issue I pointed out, and to try to give all these versions of the characters we've been working on since part 1 a definitive and legendary send-off, the story is now officially in its final legs, and will become a bit more overviewed and streamlined past this point than it has been so far. But my goal is still to introduce and discuss some interesting divergences and variations that occur in our characters and make this a more unique timeline unto itself. Easier pointing out how it would differ if I ever said made full what ifs out of some of the concepts from this story, or maybe even redid this what if itself by choosing a different route, like not making the initial time chamber training boost so substantial. So getting back to our story, due to their training in the course towards the Boost Saga, it's most likely a lot of our characters still end up as they usually would, or at least were set up to in this verse, just with a more equalized power scale between the Earthlings and the aliens, as they have not been as demoralized or discouraged by their experiences fighting against extraterrestrials, and now even evil robots and cyborgs, and thus all the Z Fighters have not lost as much faith in the worthwhileness of consistently pushing themselves and what it means to break the superhuman limit. This is also helped by the inclusion of extra Saiyan companions in some of our heroes' lives, like for example, Raditz joining the Turtle School as almost an extra Goku, meaning even if he's away, Krillin and Yamcha would always have somebody with Zenkai boost to pit themselves against. Or Nappa's joining the Crane School, giving the ever-training Tien and Chiaotzu a tough and constant Super Saiyan level sparring partner. While changes like this would also help more motivate people like Yamcha on top of his settling down with Bulma, as in this timeline more than most, he essentially achieves everything he has ever wanted to. The real challenge now would just be making sure he never loses it all, which could lead to a pretty serious devotion to the development of his strength and the efficiency at which he uses it, in a pretty Jiren-esque manner. Or maybe you could say it gives him a greater devotion or appreciation and love for the harsh deserts and wilderness that he and Puar scrounge their way up from, sorta like Cocoon's obsession with the wild. The same would go for characters like Tien and of course Krillin, as especially the monk would likely get a chance to develop his bond with Android 18 a lot sooner over the course of their stint battling against each other in a flirty death game while they are inside the Hyperbolic Time Chamber. Meanwhile, Piccolo Jr. is already exceedingly huge lead in strength that he didn't even need to merge with Kami to gain, would grow even more, near exponentially, especially if he began regularly training with Android 17 and inducted him as one of his honorary students, the way Vegeta has been taken into the Demon School in this story. Finally, growing as strong as he possibly can to catch up with everyone else, it's likely that Goku in 16 would exit and re-enter the time chamber multiple times after the android has upgraded his power with new battle data and enhancements from Capsule Corp, while Goku shows a greater adeptness than even Nappa at discovering and mastering new upgraded Super Saiyan forms, making the two wonderful training partners. Because we know about Buu and everyone else gets very strong, Buu wouldn't be very hard to deal with or prevent the summoning of, even before he got out. Beyond this, techniques like fusion would still be available, since Chiaotzu and other characters would have still spent time in the other world for training, so we would likely still have the ability to see stuff like Gogeta, Vegito, and probably even a Tiencha appearance. But just as likely, new fusions, involving our less often drawn on casts in our additions, like maybe a redeemed version of Rappa, or something like an Android 17 and Piccolo fusion named Lepiscolo. Overall, there would be an exceeding amount of possible options to pretty cleanly and optimally finish out the arc, and avoid future events as warned of, making the trip from the past fully worth it, as in the end, even if history changes and the events of GT don't occur for these guys, they will most certainly be ready for whatever does happen. Meanwhile, events like Yosa and Goku wouldn't really be relevant, or necessary for change, and for example, Adapting the Z movies in this verse is almost worth its own can of worms, though overall, I would at a glance say it would likely lead to the same outcomes, just with movie characters filling out the different plugged-in roles for our cast, who weren't or didn't remain in the story for as long as we've had them in here. Moving us on to Battle of Gods, which likely wouldn't change all that much, as not a lot has happened that should have affected the Oracle Fish's vision of a Super Saiyan god, even though the Super Saiyan who defeated Frieza was different. Not to mention, thanks to our redeeming some Saiyans on the way to this point, we would still have enough to complete Ritual Super Saiyan God, with it likely either being done for Goku still, or arguably Prince Vegeta, since this would be another good culmination of his arc so far. That said, because of how this timeline would change so drastically due to time travel, I feel like Whis may have taken a bit earlier notice of it, and would definitely mention it to Beerus, which would most likely interest and motivate the cat god to want to dissuade further use of time travel, while also seeing him drawn to non-Saiyan fighters, like specifically Krillin for example. This would then likely end up being a prime time for Gohan to finally have his time to shine, and follow up on how insanely strong he got at the beginning, and the changes that have been made in the story for him due to it. Like for example, acknowledging the fact that Piccolo has gotten so much stronger, and is now technically the teacher of some of the strongest fighters in the universe, making him somewhat like an angel in training almost, which if anything, would make Gohan the god of destruction in training he is attending, and thus, an almost natural choice of successor and another rival for Beerus, which could further motivate Beerus to not destroy everyone, but rather turn them into even more interesting possible future rivals and fellow students, as an invitation to train quietly on his planet under Whis when he is asleep could be extended, so long as more unique and engaging fights and good food are offered. It's not truly getting the jobs of deities, but more like a kind of reverse of what happened to Beerus, or just the ultimate possible promotion in the realm of gods for a mortal. Well, because of the nature of his death, Frieza likely wouldn't have his remains in the same place or state to be revived, nor would the Dragon Balls be as easy to get a hold of, since the bigger roster of Z fighters could mean tighter security, while even if Frieza was brought back, he and his men wouldn't stand much of a chance unless they went into searching for their own Hyperbolic Time Chamber a lot earlier, which again, like the Dr. Gero idea, is a concept strong enough to stand on its own as a what if. Also likely worth mentioning here since I forgot earlier, but Daima also likely wouldn't change very uniquely. The Tournament of Destroyers though would be fun, since our more diverse cast means there is actually a toss-up for who would be chosen to participate, where Team Universe 7 would likely still be able to achieve the same outcomes, especially with the more intensive training and the head start they have already had on top of that. As for the Black Future Saga, it would likely be someone like Krillin, Tien, or truly the most terrifying of all, Chaozu Black, headlining the arc as the main bad guy, alongside Zamasu, but other than that, likely not all too different or engaging from the canon arc again, past the novelty of that alone, alongside it being another chance to show off fusions of course. The Tournament of Power in my eyes would be the real pinnacle of this story, since it's a spot in Super where the Time Chamber does show up for a bit, and since it could allow for the follow-through of some prior set up interesting ideas that could come about as byproducts of the what if the Z fighters used the Time Chamber early concept, once again, may have likely served a bit better as their own scenarios, not stuffed in alongside this one. Like for example, what if Universe 7 fighters learned to harness the powers of Universe 2's kamikaze fireballs, as this version of Krillin could easily achieve something like his Sparking Zero version was able to in drawing power from a state of selflessness, or just love in general, like what he feels for his friends, and especially 18, as that could manifest in an ability very reminiscent of that of Ribrianne's. What if Chaozu learned Goro's Time Stop, or his Time Skip, or what if a Universe 7 fighter was like Jiren? All sorts of interesting ideas that could a bit better lead to a pinnacle moment for this what if, that at least lends itself towards helping all the characters achieve something signature to them, and only them in this specific what if, as in the case they were say pitted against different versions of the Dragon Ball cast from my other what ifs in a what if tournament of power. Then it would be very nice to not get these guys mixed up with any other version of themselves. And beyond that, with how generic this what if idea could become, it also lets this concept / scenario lend itself to a very good example / benchmark view of the greater cast of DBZ, like the non-Saiyan Z fighters, making it so I can point to this series when discussing a topic like continued or overuse of the Time Chamber in other series. Moving on, events like the Broly movie and Granola the Survivor Saga would still be handled by our larger cast of Saiyans, allowing those stories to still be extremely strong narratively and centered to their lore, while large-scale threats like Moro and the Return of the Red Ribbon Army, alongside the Gammas and Cell Max, could be better handled by characters who don't always get to headline the story, or just be the main character for small periods of time. In the end, the what if itself doesn't so much fall apart, as it just blends in with a lot of other what ifs like it. However, that is just kind of a consequence of both the concept of using the Time Chamber earlier, as really, some of the core aspects of the idea are things like the desire for stronger and more relevant characters other than the big five, as well as seeing just how OP they can get with optimized training, which are some of the most common themes and goals of different what ifs. And while some may disagree, this to me just begins to feel like the natural narrative cutoff point and a great place to end our story, as inadvertently, though I did not at all present or approach it as such in the beginning, I would argue this scenario is a lot like my version of what if Naruto used Shadow Clone training early, as my view view of that scenario was that the concept trivializes so much of the story so quickly. It doesn't present itself well for stakes or gripping narrative, so much as it does an interesting discussion and fun speculation of ideas that could appear elsewhere in their own, or as a part of other more grounded what if ideas. As before long, the core concept for What If the Z Fighters used the time chamber early just presents too ideal a situation for a real story, at least past the point of the time chamber actually being used at a point in time that is truly early, as this will officially bring our What If to a close. But please, tell me what you think in the comments below. Would you have liked to see me keep going for a few more parts, and go through every nitty-gritty detail of this timeline and how everything played out, until reaching the current hiatus of Dragon Ball Super, and even doing specials to cover concepts like GT, Daima, and other stories not in the main continuity, even if it did become a bit stale at the end? What ideas or concepts that could serve as what ifs all their own would you like to see one day reincarnated into full mainline what ifs? And if pitted against some of the characters from my other Dragon Ball what ifs in the end, even bereft of full narrative feats, how do you think these versions of the Z Fighters would stack up? Let me know your thoughts to all these questions and whatever else is on your mind in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video and the series as a whole, please leave me a like and a hype if you can, and thanks for watching. Be sure to take care of yourselves and the world around you. Remember to go beyond plus ultra, and I'll see you all next time.